like a waving flag. So wave your flag, now wave your flag, now wave your flag, now wave your flag.
Waar moet ik beginnen? Niet heel veel mensen hebben een kabinetsval op hun geweten. Ik wil graag beginnen door te zeggen, ik weet niet of ik mijn presentatie helemaal in het Nederlands doe, maar ik zal mijn best doen. Ik wil beginnen door te zeggen hoe ongelooflijk aangenaam het is om terug te zijn in Leiden. Ik heb hele leuke, hele mooie herinneringen hieraan. Misschien zelfs sommige van de mooiste herinneringen van mijn leven. Ik kan me heel goed herinneren dat ik toegelaten werd. Ik woonde destijds in Ede en ik ging jubelend naar mijn vrienden en vriendinnen in Ede om te zeggen, ik ben toegelaten tot de Universiteit van Leiden. Vervolgens, een aantal maanden later, kwam ik meemaken met wat het El Cid Week heette destijds. Ik weet niet of dat nog bestaat. En daar, gedurende dat week, het ging om... Ik ging van studentenvereniging naar studentenvereniging. En ik werd vragen gesteld door verenigingen zoals, destijds zoals Minerva. Ik weet niet of Minerva nog steeds bestaat. of Augustinus of Catena. Maar als eerstejaars of aanstaande eerste jaar ga je naar die verenigingen en je wordt getoetst of je daarin wel inpast of niet. Whether you fit in or not. Ik ben ook... Ik kan me de bizarre ervaring herinneren van hospiteren. Je moet ergens wonen. En in Leiden hadden we studentenhuizen, hebben we die nog. En wat we deden als studenten is... je kent een aantal mensen en ze zeggen... kom naar mijn studentenhuis. En dan heb je een aantal studenten en die zetten je neer... en die gaan je vragen stellen. Zoals, ja, wat vind je leuk dan? Wat zijn je hobby's? Waar ben je opgegroeid? En dat zijn allemaal vragen... om vast te stellen of je daar wel bij hoort of niet bij hoort. En achteraf denk ik, ik ben wel tot Leiden... Ik ben student geworden in Leiden. Ik ben geen lid geworden van een studentenvereniging. Ik vond mezelf wel te oud daarvoor. Ik ben gaan hospiteren en ik had een woning gevonden. Waarom vertel ik jullie dit? Want als we kijken naar het thema van vandaag, unlimited identiteit, unlimited identities, onbegrensd identiteiten, dan wordt een indruk gewekt dat je alles maar kan. En ik kan me voorstellen dat op een universiteit, en zeker na al die toelatingscriteria, dat er iets is van onbegrensdheid. You make it all the way to Leiden. And you belong to the chosen few, you belong to the 1%. En dus heb je iets van, ik kan de wereld aan. Maar de vraag is natuurlijk, is identiteit onbegrensd? Het is natuurlijk niet onbegrensd. It's constrained, beperkt door allerlei factoren. Ik deel met jullie 4. Natuur. Ik ben een vrouw. Ik ben 1 meter, ik vergeet het, 7 of 8. Ik ben zwart. En ik ben 46. Dus de natuur beperkt, hoewel sommige mensen nu veranderen van vrouw zijn naar man zijn enzovoort. Maar dat is de uitzondering die de regel maakt. Natuur beperkt je identiteit. Je hebt ook cultuur. En academici, onderzoekers, die zijn natuurlijk niet met elkaar en zullen nooit met elkaar eens worden over wat cultuur is. Maar het geheel van normen, van waarden, waarin je opgroeit, dat is een onderdeel that shapes your identity. And so our identities as individuals, as children, whether we like it or not, we know that this is a factor that shapes identity. Dus is cultuur belangrijk. Cultuur, sommige mensen willen onderscheiden van religie, maar naar mijn mening is religie een uitkomst van cultuur en niet andersom. En dus als individu moet je bewust zijn van het feit dat je natuurlijk gevormd wordt door je cultuur, je religie. Een derde factor die je identiteit bepaalt is, en constraints en limits zit, zijn omstandigheden. Als je geboren wordt in Leiden, dan heb je te maken met andere constraints, andere beperkingen, dan als je, zoals ik, in Mogadishu wordt geboren of opgevoed. En een vierde factor die ik van belang acht, zeker in een liberaal, geïndividualiseerd samenleving, zijn ideeën. Ideeën en soms ideologieën. Je identiteit wordt bepaald zeker als je wat ouder bent, naar je visie op de maatschappij, je visie op de wereld. Nou, gegeven al die beperkingen, dan komen we terug naar, is identity unlimited? And it's inevitable to take the Dutch position, which is everything is in the middle. Identity is fixed in some ways, but identity is also dynamic in other ways. In some ways it's limited, and in some ways it's unlimited. But why are some individuals stronger? Why are they more suited to adapting and to adjusting their identity to the circumstances of the time? That I cannot answer. I can't answer that as an expert. Maybe you should look up to psychologists and sociologists and maybe even neuroscientists. Why is my sister, who came here with me, she came here in 1994, I came in 1992, I fell in love with the Netherlands. Why did she hate it? We grew up in exactly the same circumstances, we were shaped by exactly the same factors, but when she gets exposed to Holland and to Europe, she hates it, and I love it. I can share that experience with you, but I can't really explain it, and I can't explain it in a way where I extrapolate from that single anecdote to everybody else. What I can do, however, is to try and take a guess, maybe an educated guess, at the debate of our time here in Europe. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people who want to move from the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia, and who want to come to Europe. That is the theme of the day. That is the urgent question of the day, I'm told, unless there's someone here who disagrees. Do you think there's anything more urgent at the moment? Except, of course, climate change. And climate change is forever a subject of discussion. But if we take this urgent and pressing issue of how do we deal with all these fellow human beings who are coming from circumstances of anarchy, civil war, terrible economies, failed states, and they're coming to Europe. How do we deal with that? When I left the Netherlands, that debate was ongoing. The numbers weren't as high. The numbers were high in the early 1990s, but the numbers weren't as high as they are now. And there always used to be these two positions, where one group would say, you know what, we should open the borders. And as human beings, there's no such a thing as race or borders or boundaries or identities. We're all one, and we should be together in this as one. Very appealing, of course. And I remember in the late 1990s, here in the University of Leiden, I was introduced to such terms as cosmopolitan. We were all cosmopolitan. We aspired to be as international as possible, speak as many languages as we could, and travel around. In fact, there were arguments, do you even need a passport? You didn't really need a passport. And then 9/11/2001 happened, and I think we woke up to a different world where the other group who were making the case, no, we can't take everybody in. We have our own cultural heritage. We have our own identity, and it's different from everyone else's identity. We can take a limited number of people, or maybe we should take no one. Do you remember the slogans? I don't know if they still exist. Nederland is vol. And vol is vol. En Nederland is vol. Niet omdat er migranten zijn, maar omdat Nederland een heel klein land is met heel veel mensen. But that's not, when I say Nederland is vol in this context, that's not what I mean. What I mean is for leaders arguing for a closing of the borders. And not only that, even for pulling out of the EU and Europe. So in that sense, and if you relate it to this backdrop of unlimited identity, with hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people coming from other parts of the world, what would you say? So in 2015, raise your hand if you think we should completely open the borders and let everyone in. So I am delighted to see that some of the naivety that I was used to in Leiden hasn't disappeared. And it's always good to have wonderful utopian individuals. And so you raised your hands, and I think that's very brave of you. But would you like them to be your neighbors and live in the same houses as you do in your same neighborhoods? There's a woman there who's nodding her head vigorously. And I would say, please go for it, because experience, there's nothing that determines identity, and shapes identity more than experience. Now let me ask the other question. Who is saying, let's shut the borders and not allow anyone in? Oh, come on. There's one person there. Okay, borders closed. Anyone else? Again, Leiden is not the sort of place where if you really think that the borders should be shut, that you express that. And I know we're all giggling, and we think it's funny, and in some ways it's amusing. And you know, if you want to really address a very serious subject, you have to have a certain amount of humor about it. But to be quite honest, we're in a fix. We're in a fix in Europe. We're in a fix in the West, because the rest of the world is unstable, and we will be able to absorb the first million, the second million, or the third million. But there's always going to be that time when the scale is going to defeat the idealism, the good ideas, and what we can afford to do. I think there is a middle way. I think between let's fling open the doors and let's shut the doors, there must be something in the middle that is a win-win situation. And having been an asylum seeker myself, having worked in this country as a translator, interpreter, where I was exposed to both cultures, the culture that I come from, or that I was born in and I came from, and the culture that I came into, I think it's very much possible, based on that experience of people who came here as asylum seekers, but even before that, people who came here as guest workers, to work out a selection mechanism where we can take in people who really are capable and willing, maybe I should say willing and capable, to integrate and to shift their loyalties from the value system of the countries that they left to the value system of the countries that they come to. I want to talk to you about 4 types or 4 profiles of, if you take these masses and masses of people who are trying to come in, if you were to profile them as if you are, hospitieren by a studentenhuis or you want to, you're thinking of the admissions of the university, het toelatingscriterium. We have in New York some residences where you can't buy the apartment or rent the apartment unless the board of residents allow you in. So as human beings, we're obviously used to selecting one another on different criteria. Now, one thing we don't want to do is to object to someone's fixed identity. For someone to say, we're not going to let these people in because their skin is black, or we don't want women. So in a way, we've moved away from that. Is there anybody here who objects to people being let in because of their skin color? Or because of their gender? Or even because of their religion? And the fact that you sit here and that you're willing to set aside these natural identity shapers, gender, color of skin, ethnicity, for me, that's a measure of civilization. It's a measure of saying, okay, identity is not unlimited, but we are willing, obviously, to give up some of the certainties that we have. And we think that whoever comes in can enrich us, but not everyone can enrich us. So then we have to profile, and profile along something very different from what we have now, which is what we have now when you're asked, can we bring in asylum seekers, is, well, who is a real asylum seeker and who is not a real asylum seeker? Who is a real refugee and who is not a real refugee? Who is suffering more from who? It's extremely difficult, impossible, perhaps, to select people on that criteria. Not in 2015, but it was glaringly obvious to me in the 1990s when I was a translator, and ambtenaren, civil servants of the Immigratie- en Naturalisatiedienst were wasting 2 hours, 2.5 hours, sometimes 2 days, trying to determine whether an asylum seeker had first gone through some other country, the first country of access or not. And the asylum seeker would say, well, I tore up my papers. Where do you come from? Do you come from Nigeria or do you come from Somalia? The asylum seeker would say, I don't know. Why? Because at some point, you start to get smart, and the smugglers who prepare you for the interview and the legal aid members who prepare you for the interview tell you, here is the fixed criteria. You have to meet the Geneva Convention within these treaties. If your story fits in with this framework, then you have a chance of being admitted. And so what happens is everybody who wants to come in starts to adapt their story to that framework. And it's not working because that legal framework was put in place at a time when the world was very different. And so is it possible to think of a different framework? And I think yes. I think that Europe needs people. Europeans as a population are shrinking, and shrinking quite fast. Maybe not in the Netherlands, but countries like Germany, Italy, Spain, do need to rev up their population, and they're not going to do it by birth. So it has to come through some other way. Now, in the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia, failing states, but with very young populations, people are voluntarily moving away. Is it possible then to have a win-win situation where Europe can take in those people that they think will fit in with them, are good for their economy? To answer that question, then you have to profile differently. And we have an experience, and I'm saying this for the second or third time, with people coming here as guest workers, as refugees, as asylum seekers. I arrive at 4 different types of people that we know from those who have come in. Maybe you have more, maybe you have less. The first type, I would call them the adapter. It is a person who comes in from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from Somalia, from wherever, it doesn't matter. Asks for asylum, is granted asylum, finds a job, makes friends, is very good to his wife, takes his children through school, and is very responsible. Actually know a man who did that. His 2 children went to the University of Groningen and are very, in the Dutch terms, aangepast. Let's call that category of people the adapter, of degene die zich kunnen aanpassen, de aanpasser. But you have a second category. I've come to call them the menace. You've probably seen the news in Sweden, in France, we've had them here. It's a young man, mostly a young man, usually, draaiduurcriminaliteit, schooluitval, very selfish, it just becomes part of the gang or sets up gangs and costs society much more than that person contributes to society. Then you have the fanatic or the fundamentalist, someone who comes in and says, I know everything about the law, the constitution, the culture. I know what freedom is. I know what democracy is. I know all of these principles of a secular liberal nation state, but I hate it. I don't like it. And I'm going to spend my life fighting against that and fighting for Sharia law. So that's one category of people. And then there's a 4th category of people. You will say, or an individual, maybe you could expand that to an entire category, the coaster. That's an individual who comes in, asks for asylum, or came in as a guest worker, and at some point has no work and gets welfare, uitkering. And he's unemployable. He's very good within his own community, but he's unemployable. And he'll never be employed. And maybe his children could be adapters. They could become a menace. They could become a fundamentalist. But typically the picture is it's somebody who will forever be on an uitkering. I have 6 minutes left. I want to ask you, and now you have to be really honest. Ideally, if you were able to make a selection, and there are hundreds, millions of people that are trying to come in, which profile would you have in? Would it be the adapter? Put your hand up. And that is exactly every person I speak to in the United States, all over Europe. Nobody objects, no voter objects to the adapter. They don't worry about their skin color or their age or any of that. As long as people are willing to come here and adapt, they're taken. Who wants the menace? What about the fanatic? Oh, you put up your hand, you want the menace? To make your life exciting, I suppose. Well, you don't have to bring the menace in. You can go to some of these countries and see. Go to my country of origin and see how the Al-Shabaab operate. Who wants the fundamentalist? In a way, having 1 or 2 fundamentalists isn't so bad because it takes you back to first principles. It forces you to answer the question, what are we about? And then the coaster. Yeah, and I expected a few hands to go up because it's a sort of charity. Somebody who is in Syria, in Iraq, Libya, Somalia, whom you could give welfare here, but who could have some sort of a life, you would grant that, but then you're driven by compassion, which is a good thing. But I think if we start talking about immigration with a vision on when people come in, how do we integrate them? How do we even select them? How do I know from, there are boats and boats and boats full of people coming along? How can I tell who is home? And the way to answer that is to set up the process the process of selection. Companies have that, universities have that, we all have that. I mean, you don't want to have anybody in your house. You want somebody in your house who will obey your house rules. So why do we think that with nation states, identities are unlimited and you can have everyone and everything in? It doesn't make sense. So is it possible to set up a framework that can select along the lines of who is going to enrich us, which individual asylum seeker or refugee or immigrant are we going to have a win-win relationship with? And who are we going to keep out? That can be set up. In fact, there is an infrastructure in place where right now we are selecting on, who is a real refugee, who meets the Geneva Convention, who doesn't, and so on. So do not think of it as being impossible to reset that. It is possible. But the big question is the political will. Are we willing, and who, and which political leader, who is going to take the initiative to say, well, there is this enormous framework of, a maze of laws and measures and policies. Much of it is housed in Brussels. Who's going to overhaul that? Who's going to break that taboo? And I think that is the central question. It is not whether identities are limited or unlimited. I think the answer is somewhere in the middle. Parts of identity can be shaped by the individual, by circumstances, by society, and some of our identity is fixed. I look back to my time in Leiden here, and I'm going to be 46 years next month. And I look back and I think so many good things happened to me in my life. And I've had so many challenges and so much adversity. But when it comes to my education, I mean education in higher learning, and therefore, in many ways, my emancipation from the idea of a constrained, fixed, and limited identity, I thank my years in Leiden. I thank my professors. My experience here was absolutely the best and the greatest. And it's what's made me, my years in Leiden have given me this enormous opportunity to be who I am now. An individual who takes part in these conversations about where our world is going and to make sense and to see and test if other people make sense. That's what my professors here in Leiden have given me. And for that, I'm very, very grateful. And I'm very proud to be a Leidener, to speak of Leiden the way I do. And that is the reason why I didn't hesitate at all to come here and be with you. And now I think is the moment for the 15 minutes, I'm looking at the organization, to take questions from the audience.
Yes. Thank you.